Hey there, Christopher Thunder here from the World's Dirtiest Workshop. I'm here to talk to you about your wheel bearings. Today's exercise is a full replacement of the wheel bearings on the front wheel. We will be removing them and installing new bearings. Simple Green is a nice mild detergent you can use for this job. It'll keep your hands clean. You're going to want some wood blocks to create yourself a wheel bearing removal station. You're going to see here that the blocks are closer together for rotor side up, and they will be further apart for rotor side down. It's a very good idea when creating your stand to not screw the blocks together. This way you can adjust the blocks, separate them so that you can work on either side of the wheel properly. Get out a door popper tool that has a forked end and remove both dust covers from either side of the wheel. Once you've done this, set the wheel back up with the rotor side up. Here's a quick review of the parts we'll be working with today and where they're located at inside the hub. You're going to see that the axle bushing sits between the two bearings, and that must be checked after the removal of the bearings. You're going to have to do this next part by feel. And what's important is the feeling in your hand when you make the strike. Did the strike cause the bearing to move? Did you feel it move? Or did the bearing bounce back at you and cause your hand to vibrate? If your hand vibrated, chances are that bearing did not move. Just like when Wile E. Coyote hits the giant rock, the rock did not move. When I first started this job, I noticed that my Stanley screwdriver was chipping away. I also felt that I wasn't getting enough force out of this carpenter's hammer that I had. It is a great shop hammer. It's a ball peen hammer, and it is Granddad's. But it just didn't have the force to move the bearing the way I wanted it to move. So I had to get out a much heavier hammer, and I got out my Craftsman screwdriver for a better feel. I began to notice more successful strikes, and I could feel the bearing moving with each strike. The one thing that I did not expect was that the Craftsman screwdriver end was starting to fold over. And that's how things are with me. Sometimes you just have to get to it, try it out, and see what happens. And eventually, you learn things. So this is my first try at this. And I thought I did a pretty good job. The test ride I did afterwards really turned out to be really nice and very fruitful. I rode out into the night west of Dallas and headed for Weatherford. By the time I got past Fort Worth, the skies were pitch black and the road was completely smooth. And that's when I really felt that I had done the job right. The wheel was completely smooth. All I could feel was the roughness of the road. Here I'm just using the 1/2-inch extension to bang out the other wheel bearing. It isn't much different than the screwdriver, but it does give you more force. When you're done here, make sure that you check the inside of the middle bushing for any scars or any other imperfections. You can sand them off with a little fine grit sandpaper wrapped around a screwdriver. Time to get out that tub of ice water and make sure that those bearings have chilled down really nicely. This took about an hour, and you want to make sure that when you pull a wheel bearing out that you get right to driving it into that rim. The socket I'm using here today is not the same size as the wheel bearing, and it really isn't slightly smaller. It's too small. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to prepare to hit the bearing with the socket right up against the edge. Now I don't want to, say, smash the rim or dent the edge of the rim there, so I want to be really careful before each strike. You can see here I'm just moving the socket around, and as I get closer to the rim itself, I want to make sure that I'm not hanging the socket over the edge of the bearing, because that will dent the rim. So use a lot of caution here. There was a certain part of this where I didn't feel like I was getting the kind of movement I wanted, so I had to increase the striking power to get the bearing to move a little further. you're just going to have to make adjustments through the process. Eventually the bearing gave way and then just started to drop in really fast. At that point, I had to lighten up the hits that I was using and make sure that the bearing did not travel too far or get crooked inside the hole. You can see here that a little persistence really paid off for me. Here I'm getting out a new dust cover, and I'm going to place it into the opening and set the socket down on it and drive it straight down in. I was a little reluctant to hit it dead center, so I moved the socket a little to one side and then kind of moved it around as I struck it down in, and that seemed to work just fine. Earlier in the video, I talked about setting the parts aside. The last thing you want to do after you remove the old parts is get them confused with the new parts. And that's really important because if you don't look at a bearing, you could flip over the bearing and keep the damaged side down and think, oh, I have a new bearing in my hand, and you'll accidentally knock in one of the old bearings that you just destroyed. So make sure that that doesn't happen. Keep the old parts as far away from your workspace as possible, and don't accidentally pick up an old part. Here I was really dilly-dallying around as I was trying to show everybody what I was doing in another version of this video. You have to move quickly. You have to get the bearing out of the bag as fast as possible, get it onto the hub, and get your tool ready to knock it in so the bearing does not warm up. Because as it warms, it expands, and as that happens, it gets harder to knock into the hub. When I do these jobs, I don't have a lot of stress. Yes, it is my personal bike, but I have two bikes, and if I damage something, well, I'll just have to fix it, and it's a life lesson learned. So, use a little courage. Get out there and try stuff, and you'll probably find that you save a lot of money by watching a few YouTube videos and going out there and trying it yourself. And this is why I make videos for you. I always hold on to the old parts in case I order something and it comes as the wrong part. This way I can compare the old to the new, and I make sure that I have the right thing when I begin the next job.
It's astounding. Time is fleeting. Madness takes its toll. But listen closely.
Not for very much longer.
I've got to keep control.
This is Christopher Thunder from the World's Dirtiest Workshop saying, fix your wheel bearings.
It's just a jump to the left.